Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So thank you for the introduction and indeed for the invitation. I'm going to talk to you about rapid response collecting. It's a new initiative that we've introduced at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. I work with contemporary product design, but it stretches across the reaches of the team I sit in. We're contemporary architecture, design, and digital. We've been in post for 2 years, and when we arrived, we were tasked with looking at the designed world afresh. It's a new strand to the museum's wider collecting activities. I should say the museum has about 700 employees, 120 curators. We are a team of 4. But for us, rapid response collecting is about putting objects on immediate display while they're still the subject of discussion or even contention. Our gallery has been open for 6 months, and it's a great opportunity to kind of think of the consequences of our activities. This is one of our more recent acquisitions. It's the LEGO Research Institute. As you can see, there's an astronomer, a paleontologist, and a chemist. It was launched via the LEGO Ideas platform and suggested by a Stockholm-based geochemist. It sold out within days before reaching major stores such as Walmart, Target, or Toys R Us. For me, this set is interesting because it's the first in the Danish toy maker's 82-year history to show women in a professional setting and being targeted at girls. It echoes some of what Alexandra was saying earlier. For me, it's one of those examples where objects can be used to explore pressing and current debates. Here, role models for young girls, gendered toys, but as importantly, women entering science or STEM careers. The LEGO Academics Twitter feed, which has near 50,000 followers, makes this point very playfully. Donna Yates, its creator, says, so it's the trials and tribulations of academic life. She says yes, it's about the academic jokes, but it's the fact that these are female academics in normal academic situations being normal scientists. It's this object that lends us the eyes into an important debate today. One of our first, and indeed one of the areas around objects around which our ideas crystallized, it's definitely our most high-profile acquisition for sure, is the Liberator. It's the world's first 3D printed firearm. I'm sure most of you are in some way familiar with it. Within a month of Cody Wilson, a law student, Texas-based law student, releasing the files on the internet, my colleague, our curator of digital, went off to see him and selected a series of objects from his studio. For us, it was immediately clear that this was a moment in design history. It's a 3D printed object that in what it is and what it has the potential to do has forever changed our understanding of distributed manufacturing. I say that working within the context of an institution that has collected 3D printed furniture and other beautiful objects made with this technique for more than a decade. Other items we've acquired under rapid response include this pair of cargo trousers. We bought them immediately after the factory, Rana Plaza factory in Dhaka, Bangladesh, collapsed on the 24th of April 2013. It's an object that connects the British High Street in this case with the most significant disaster in the garment industry of recent times. The institution I work in is the National Collection of Textiles and Fashion. I think that connection is important. Another is the Motorola WT4000, a piece of wearable tech, but it, in effect, here, a microcomputer that shifts our understanding of the nature of work. We also have Christian Louboutin's nude collection, a range of shoes in 5 ethically diverse skin tones. I challenge you to think about what the word nude means. But for me, it's an economic story. It shows shifts in the world economy, that set of shoes. Our most recent acquisition, and seemingly quite fitting for this environment here, but also the city in which I am, is 23andMe. It's a personal genetic testing kit that is seeking to change the way scientific information is accessed and analysed, so taking it from the scientists and the medical professions out to the wider community. We put this on display in December of last year. It was launched onto the UK market, and if any of you are familiar with this product here in the US, you'll understand why it was launched as an information service as opposed to a diagnostic tool. For us, it's about bringing these types of ideas and objects into the museum. Each of them, what I've shown you today, but also the others that we've acquired, are material evidence of social, economic, political, and technological change. They've been newsworthy precisely because they advance what design can do, or they reveal truths about how we live together. And that living together is something I will come back to. Now, to put this in context, this is the Victoria and Albert Museum. We were founded in 1852 from the proceeds of the Great Exhibition. The Great Exhibition presaged the World Expo, which I think, or with which many of you will be, again, familiar. It was the world's first decorative arts, or is still the world's first decorative arts and design museum. And here in the States, it's a model, or served as a model, for the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, amongst many others. When established, the V&A's mission was to collect contemporary design as an educational tool for manufacturers, designers, and the public. And this is a mission that we, through Rapid Response, are seeking to return to in many ways. We are 160 years old. The way the museum has dealt with the contemporary has shifted over that period of time. In the mid-20th century, we went so far as to say we couldn't collect anything that was newer than 50 years. We have changed our views now. This is Henry Cole, our first director, and he put the kind of mission of the museum much more succinctly. A powerful antidote to the gin palace. I'm sure they would have been fun, but this is the museum world we're in. So it was to be a place of learning and education for all. That meant, beyond being the first museum of design, it was also the first museum to have gas lighting, extended opening hours, and a public restaurant. Learning was to take place in comfort. It's within this institution that we now have Rapid Response Collecting. We have a modest gallery space. We've got 7 miles of galleries. We managed to get 5 showcases. It's a territorial game. But it's here that we put on permanent display acquisitions that we have seen, read about, been told about. And we put them on display as quickly as we can. That's the rapid aspect of what we're up to. It generally takes between 2 and 5 days, and in the museum world, I can promise you, that's quite fast. In curatorial terms, I'm here speaking as a curator. There is a practice, a very established practice of waiting for a period of time to pass before an object gains significance and enters the museum and is kept for posterity. But we wanted to kind of get around that to reflect more about how we can engage through the museum with the world in which we all live. So it was about showing visitors objects in the museum in a space where they can come and learn and think or disagree. Objects that they might be wearing, might be reading, playing, etc. So here are our galleries. I like this because you can see it's in the context of our historical collections. And one of the things we absolutely do in our displays is make absolutely clear why this object has entered the museum at a given point in time. At its heart, Rapid Response Collecting, and this is a curatorial practice, is about looking outwards to the world. Museums have got many chairs, they've got many pots. It's not a reason to collect more chairs or pots, but to think about the things, the objects, the material culture that shapes our everyday. And it's about being responsive to the global events that bear on design, technology, and manufacturing. As I mentioned, we're 6 months in, and we've been staggered by the amount of attention and press coverage this work has received. It's one of the reasons I'm here today. To a large extent, the coverage has been positive, and of course it's quite newsy. So in terms of design criticism, the design press like it because they can see themselves within it. But I would also argue it's about challenging people to think. It's popular because it challenges people to think what design is today, what it is to collect, and what the role of the museum is in 21st century public life. Not all of our coverage has been positive. Here we've got the Sunday Times, so one of the most widely read newspapers in the UK, accusing us of collecting controversy, pointing our fingers and telling off. Others questioned why low-value everyday objects of little aesthetic merit were entering the hallowed halls of the Victoria and Albert Museum. Now, I think museums, in what we do, and this relates to what the quote that Fiona mentioned of Paola's, that we should be there to raise questions and challenge people to think through what design is, but also what our public institutions are for. In the way we display these objects, it's not about telling visitors what to think about mass manufacture or globalization, but it's about bringing objects and ideas into the museum and inviting their imaginations to set flight. Of course, all of our visitors come with different perspectives. They will go away with different perspectives. It's about putting information, a fact-based set of texts out there and see what comes back. It's a dialogue. We're not there to... It's not as directly didactic as I think some institutions are. Here are Katy Perry eyelashes, which again have also captured the popular imagination. For us, this is an object that connects the most followed person on Twitter with a very anonymous woman in Indonesia who individually hand ties strands of human hair, having learned how to do it for 6 months. So rapid response collecting enables us to look at popular culture, consumer culture, the mass-produced, and indeed the unauthored. These objects are all important to us, just as important as the high-end furniture or the sleek gadgets that you will perhaps more familiarly see in design museums. But they are of interest to us because it's often these very everyday or quotidian objects that challenge us to think about the world in which we live most clearly, and think about how objects circulate, often beyond the intentions of the designer or the manufacturers. And just to come back to the other thing, it puts at question what it is to collect. Here we've got Cody Wilson's gun. This was the one that was fired that set the story in motion. The sinister, in terms of documenting the world, demands our attention just as much as the beautiful. The acquisition of this gun did cause us quite a few, problems is the wrong word, but we did have to stand in defense of this action to quite some extent. They have the same status as a Canova sculpture or a 17th century oil painting. We keep them for posterity. That's the role of a national institution in the UK. De-accessioning is something that is very difficult to do. It's a very topical subject at the moment as well, I think, in the States here. But it also brings with it new challenges, materials, inexpensive ones, innovative. How do we preserve those? What do our conservators do to keep these objects for the long term? When we're collecting something that's digital, we've recently acquired Flappy Bird as a game. What do we actually collect? How do we keep the digital? How do we preserve it? These are all new challenges that we, working in the contemporary, bring to the museum field. And as importantly with rapid response, because it's these moments of time that bring these objects into the museum, how do we document the context which has warranted their acquisition? As a curator, and I feel this very strongly, I think it's a mode of collecting that revivifies the museum as a place of learning, but also a place of discussion and debate about design and public life. It's about offering a broader understanding of what design is, and I think I'll be very curious to hear what we talk about in these wider contexts over the next 2 days, because absolutely I see myself here learning about design. But how does that have its place in the museum? These objects and this way of working is to catalyse broader discussion about the cultural weight and significance of objects. But it's also to kind of challenge architects and designers to think about the impact their work has in the field. I often think particularly in the product design world, more time could be spent on objects for social good or discussion as opposed to the next beautiful chair or pot. And I think so often that is what design is understood as, and that's very much what we are rallying against. So that's what I see my role as a curator, and this is a form, you could say, of institutional design criticism. Thank you.
So opportunity to ask a couple of questions, and then we're going to have a breakout session before the final 2 talks of the morning. So are there any questions for this one? Oh, we have a question over here.
Thanks. So with objects like the eyelashes and the cargo pants, you're putting the spotlight on the mode of production and the social implications of those. Do you see that happening? Was that happening before with the older objects that are collected in the museum? Because I remember seeing, a focus on like technical innovations in production. So what did it take to make the bentwood chair? I do not recall seeing, from recent exhibitions, I've seen that type of focus on the modes of production and the social context. So is that something new that you're introducing, or is that something you're picking up and just applying to novel kind of today's objects?
I think it's collecting is it's about acquiring objects into the permanent collections of the museum. So it sits at a slight distance to temporary exhibitions. I mean, of course, we hope that our objects will be exhibited in other ways. I think this idea of putting objects on immediate display and allowing our visitors, or just being open and frank about why this object is here and now, is something that's quite unusual to, or unique to rapid response. But the kind of social, contextual issues around objects, that has a much larger and wider field of practice. So, but it's about saying, come back again and again. We have 12 objects. Each time a new object comes to us, we swap one out. So it's about coming back and returning and coming to the museum as a public place, a civic space, to think about the world around us. And I think we had a discussion about this yesterday as to whether it's a place free of commercial pressure. But I think it's a different location in which to think about things around a material fact. And it has a different influence and effect on you, I would argue, than when you read it in the press or in a book or on the line.
We've already had a little... Oh, since you spit out the AV.
Yeah.
Thanks. This is a sort of weird one. I don't know how useful how able you'll be able to respond to it in a useful way, but I'm kind of very interested in the moment in this sort of split between creative and critiquing cultures. It seems to me that many of my friends in the UK working in technology are actually working in the sort of critiquing culture. Like we are critics. They are making things example pieces. Whereas in the US, in Silicon Valley and stuff like that, I would say that's probably not the case. So there's almost a sort of swathe between this mix between Silicon Valley culture being too uncritical and British technology culture being too critical and not creative enough. I wondered how do you see museums? Because the other thing is, I think the implication of the critical mindset is that we are the intelligent people with an observation, and that the creative people are money grabbing. So I was interested in what if you have a sense of how these two cultures can interoperate or feed back into one another in a sort of positive way.
I speak for the institution within which I work, and specifically the team in which I sit. And we're very much interested in objects that have had traction in the real world, and actually inputting them in the museum and raising questions around them. We're challenging designers, people in the field, to think more broadly about their own practice. Also for our visitors to come and see themselves, think about the world around them. Critical design or design fictions is something that's very, very popular in the UK. I agree with you. But at the moment, within rapid response, it's not something that we're engaging with. But to come back to that question, we're an institution of 700. It's a place of multiple voices. Whether here the design scene is not critical enough of itself, I think that's part of one of the questions you're asking. You look like I'm putting words in your mouth, I don't mean to. But I do think that's the case, yes. But I don't think that necessarily means that you have to step outside the design field to critique or look at the world. Another strand of the work that I do is very much about social design, design for social good, and actually saying there are so many problems in the world, let's try and solve them. They might not be for commercial gain, and what the role of designers is within that. That's a critical engagement, but it's not necessarily about creating fictions.
Okay, so I think I'll take one more question and then we will break.
Thank you, lovely talk. I'm really curious to be observing these objects behind a glass. How did you decide to display them behind a glass as opposed to have people handle the objects?
Museums impose these restrictions on one, but I think in many instances here, so the museum can create a distance between the viewer and the object. It necessarily or inevitably does, but I think sometimes here it's quite useful. It's a very kind of, the way we design the cases, it's very simple. We took cases over that were already there, and so what we've tried to do again is make it as simple and straightforward to change the objects in and out. That inevitably means that it's quite a low maintenance, but also simple presentation. I mean here, Lufsig is a soft toy that became, it's an IKEA object. It became a thing of political protest on the 7th of December, 2013, when it's thrown at the governor of Hong Kong. It has this whole story around it. That toy into a glass case, many people, we've sensed and seen it happen, and it's been quite special for me. Visitors from Hong Kong feeling that their story is being recognized and being taken seriously. I think the same goes for the Katy Perry eyelashes. I can go 2 meters down the road from the door of the museum and buy those, but the way I understand them, because I'm being forced to distance myself from my everyday, is very, very different. We have the Oculus Rift headset as well in the collection now, and we bought that at a time when Facebook bought the company, this sense of virtual reality becoming reality. And with these more digital objects, it's ever more of a problem. And so what we try and do is we brought gamers in to demonstrate those objects, to try and circumvent. But it's important here as well, because these objects, in acquiring them into the permanent collection, we're saying we want to keep these. So it's necessary that you can't touch them, because your finger grease will make that plastic yellow. So it's tricky, and you have to play the pros and cons off each other. And I think because these are so often very modest objects, it doesn't do any harm. I use that word advisedly. I think if I were exhibiting a Swarovski crystal chandelier, it's a different dynamic.
Okay, thank you so much, Corinna. So 3... Yeah.